Alright, CNT140, we're looking at Chapter 1. Just to set the stage here, they're giving us a little bit of history of telephone, telegraph, that sort of thing, because a lot of what we do in cabling today has come from these technologies or these developments. So it's worthwhile to know just a quick couple highlights of history of telegraph, telephone, to understand how we cable and connect things up for moving data around on computer networks. That's why they're doing that for us. Alright, so let's wade right in here. They first mentioned that telecom spans basically 150 years, starting from telegraph up to what we use today, fiber optic, satellite, that sort of thing. Obviously the past today, the pace of change is much more rapid today. Starting way back at the telegraph, it was used to send letters and numbers represented by electrical pulses. And the first ideas for this came in the 1700s. Gray demonstrates that you could actually send electrical charge across a thread. So it's kind of the beginning idea of, hey, maybe we can move something else across, you know, they don't have wire yet, so to speak, but a wire. 1800s now, roughly almost 100 years later, we have another scientist that discovers the principle of magnetism. Running a wire, I should say, when you connect a wire up and run electricity through it, through a battery kind of thing, that produces a magnetic field, and he shows through a little needle here, almost like a compass needle, if you will, that when you ran electricity through the wire here, this moves. So it's understanding the magnetic fields from electromagnetism. Not long after that, we have Alessandro Volta invents the electrical cell, the first battery. And here is actually a representation of that, a model of that, showing the plates all connected. You have plate, the cell, if you will, is basically two different plates of metal, copper, zinc, copper, zinc, copper, zinc, and between them is an electrolyte. And those stacked up, each one makes, you know, a little fraction of a volt. All those add up to make what we would call a battery today. 1830s, you have Gauss and Weber develop telegraph principles using electromagnetic induction. So they actually have, if I remember correctly, they connected their labs together across town with a telegraph so they could send messages to each other. Cook and Wheatstone come along in the late 1830s with a patent for a 5-needle telegraph. And here's actually what it looked like. If you zoom in, you actually see that there's 5 needles here, and the idea was by using the different keys here, you move the needles, and those needles would point to and represent a letter. If you hit the, you know, these two buttons, so to speak, you could cause this needle to move and this needle to move, and those pointed to, up the tree, the letter G, so you could send an actual letter across the system. Obviously, you know, I should say it works well, but obviously with the multiple wires needed to do this, it's kind of cumbersome to hook up. Again, late 1830s, we have Morse, that we're used to, Morse Code, introduced the telegraphic design. His patent is awarded in 1840. 1844, Morse granted funding by Congress to open a line between Washington and Baltimore. And his telegraph is what we think of when we think of a telegraph, this little telegraph key. And with that, he developed the Morse Code, a symbol, a pattern of dots and dashes to represent letters. So here he developed kind of a code, if you will, of sending short electrical pulses and long electrical pulses to represent letters. And it doesn't sound huge to you and I, but the idea of being able to send a message from town to town quickly was huge. Prior to this, you had letters and newspapers and word of mouth. So it would take many days, weeks, months for a message to travel from town to town to town, you know, from New York City out to California, if you will. Now with the advent of the telegraph and a means of sending a message from town to town, here's another little close-up of the telegraph. I could actually send a message from town A here to town B here, and you could think of this as, you know, Harrisburg to Camp Hill kind of thing. Across the river, so to speak, I could send a message very quickly, and then that town could relay to the next one. So within hours, I could have a message get from this part of the country to another whole part of the country instead of days, weeks, and months. So that was kind of huge. But this also lays the groundwork for cable design to be able to carry data. That's what we're after. We'll come back in the next podcast talking about beginning of telephone.